Hi guys, DC Breaks back here on the DBS channel with a video all about a sound design innovation I'm really excited about, courtesy of the guys over at Kilohertz, who have just released a brand new snap-in called Filter Table. It combines the idea of a wavetable synth with a filter, so that now you can cycle through different filter shapes in sequence, and some of these shapes can be incredibly complex. In fact, you can actually generate filter tables from samples, which opens up all sorts of interesting sound design possibilities. So in this video, I'm going to show you 5 amazing ways to use the brand new filter table from Kilohertz. So let's jump in. So one of the cool things you can do with Filter Table is to use it to basically encode an audio sample onto an analog waveform. So what I mean by that is, if I take a square wave that sounds like this and run it through the Filter Table, I can take a sample and apply the kind of sort of step-by-step filter characteristics of that sample onto that waveform with quite interesting results. So before I jump into lane 1 and explain what's going on in terms of the processing there, let's look at a workflow for how this basically works. So if you just take an instance of Filter Table and click on the button here, this will open up the Filter Table editor, and from here you can create from a sample. So I'm going to load up a dubstep kind of bass loop from Splice, from Virtual Riot. It sounds like this. And then when we load it in, we get something that looks like that. We can just tidy up the end a little bit there to make sure it finishes around the right spot and hit done. And then what that will do then is give us our filter table. So to be able to cycle through this, we just need to assign a modulator to the filter table position. And now every time I trigger a note, this is going to kind of cycle through each of these different filters in our filter table, and that has the effect of kind of playing through the sample, but as a filter applied to our square wave. So if we need to speed it up or slow it down, we can just change the rate of the LFO to do that. And then we've also got the ability to adjust the cutoff and the resonance, which can really drastically alter how this sounds. Particularly the resonance, it really gives it that kind of metallic timbre. Now obviously at the moment this one doesn't sound very good, and what I found is that if you work in multipass and therefore can process this in multiband, you can do a bit more with it. So for example, on the low end here I've got a separate band where I'm using a low pass filter, so that I'm still getting the movement from the filter table applied to that square wave, but everything above, let's see, 100 Hertz is kind of being filtered off, so we're just focusing on the sub bass there. So if I just solo this, for example, you can hear the same rhythm, the same movement, but it's just kind of low pass filtered. Now, the other thing you can do is to obviously process it in post here. So I've just got some kind of limiting compression going on at this end, and then you can set up macros that you can then manipulate at the kind of top level in phase plant. So I've created macros for the cutoff and the resonance. I've also been able to adjust the band split, so we can control how much of the signal is kind of going to be split between these different bands. And this is the glue here, is just the amount of processing. It's controlling the mix on the kind of post effects chain as well. So coming back up into phase plant, we can then, of course, add in other effects. I've just got some distortion and some EQ here to kind of make things just sound a bit fatter. And then we can really start to take advantage of the modular nature of phase plant to pull that sample apart in ways that you simply couldn't do if it was just a piece of audio that you were manipulating normally. So, for example, because we're effectively re-synthesizing this audio, we can use different modulators to affect different parameters of our sound, and it will all still sound kind of natural because it's synthesized rather than trying to play back an audio file each time. So I have an LFO table here, adding extra movement. This is modulating things like the pitch, also the resonance and the cutoff of our multipass, and sort of the frequency of disperse that I've got here as well. And what I've then done is create different macros to control different things. So starting from left to right, we've got this pitch mod here. So the pitch of our square wave can be shifted up and down, and that's going to control the pitch of our sort of sample overall in a natural way. So you can see that moving up and down, with and without. I can control all of the modulation globally, so this is basically controlling the range of the output of this LFO table where all this modulation is happening. So if I turn this down, you'll see that that kind of prevents any additional modulation. So we're just back to our kind of filter table sample. But then we can get some additional movement and some extreme movement going by turning this up to higher values. We've also got this range control here. So this is controlling the amount of the output of this LFO, which in turn is controlling the frame rate of this. So as I turn this up, we're going to get a greater range of this LFO table applying the modulation. And because, again, we're kind of effectively resynthesizing that sample with our square wave, we can also adjust the properties of the square wave itself. So we've got the pulse width, which is the kind of width of our individual squares here, and that can lead to some interesting results as well. I've also got a control here to smooth the modulation down of our LFO table here. So if we bring this back, we get the original unsmooth wavetable, which you can see is much more kind of jagged, and that creates a much more extreme effect. So we can just kind of tame that back a little bit. Just going to take the pitch mod off of there. We can also adjust the kind of pattern of that modulation. So here, the way I'm doing that is to adjust the phase position of the, so basically where this LFO table starts, and therefore changing the pattern of the modulation that's being applied. So we can get some different variations that way. And I've also created this inverter, which basically changes the phase of the sine wave, which, as you remember, is controlling the frame rate position. So that has the effect of inverting the pattern from one side to the other. So pattern will sound like this here. And on the other side, it's kind of the opposite. And then as a finishing touch, what I've done is I've created a group of different random generators. And just get rid of these so I can show you that in here. And so what this is basically groups of a random generator which modulates a sample and hold. So if I turn the mod wheel up, because this is kind of controlling all of this, you can start to see that I'm getting random values generated. Every time I trigger a note, that's going to be held by the sample and hold. So it'll be different every time. And then that is controlling one of these macros. In this case, this one's controlling the pitch. This one here will be controlling the range, and so on. So the way it works now is that I can control the mod wheel to choose how much randomness I want to inject onto these different macros. So a very small amount. And as I bring it up, we get a range of potential random values. So as I press my note, each time I'm getting different random values applied to these macros. Now the only one I didn't apply that to, or the only two rather, was the global modulation control, because we might find a really nice modulation but it's a bit much, you want to back it all off. And then also this slow down one. So this basically just slows down the rate of the LFO that's playing through the filter table and the modulation rate that's being applied to that as well in unison, so we can slow the whole thing down, and that can create some really interesting cool sounds as well. So if you try to do that with an audio sample, it wouldn't still retain all of that kind of natural cool texture. It would start to kind of sound really lossy and fall apart. So a really fun way of playing around with the filter tables to get some really interesting cool movement and textures when you're doing bass design.
Hey everyone, I hope you've been enjoying this tutorial. At DBS Institute, we provide degree level training to help you take your skills to the next level and start your career in music production. Head to the link to find out more.
Now, another really cool thing you can do with filter tables is use them for designing color bass. And color bass, if you don't know, is a kind of melodic style of dubstep where you kind of take what would otherwise be quite sort of strong bass sounds and then using different processing techniques impart kind of rich harmonic content on the top to kind of make them sound a bit more lush and musical sounding. So in this example, I've just got a very raw kind of bass sample that I've made myself. And if we, for example, open up the filter table and look at some of the presets, there's actually a whole folder of color bass style presets that we can use. So this one, for example, focus pentatonic. If I turn up the resonance, you can see that it looks a bit like it's kind of boosting certain frequencies in the pentatonic scale and also notching out any frequencies that don't fit into that pentatonic scale. And then using the cutoff frequency, we can kind of shift that up and down the frequency spectrum. So this is a little bit like a topic I covered recently on this channel called harmonic retuning, and this is what it sounds like. Now, we're just on the first table, or first filter of the filter table, so let's hear how it develops as we kind of scroll through the filter table. You can see and hear that it's adding in a lot more harmonics. They're becoming a lot more dense. And this is kind of making it more like a chord. Almost sounds a bit like a church organ or something. So you can use the mix to just mix in a little bit of this on top of the kind of gnarly bass. But one problem with that is that the harmonic scale that you're kind of printing onto the bass sound isn't moving with the notes that you're playing. So a way around that, if I come into this lane here where I've set this up, and this is, I'll just play it before I show you how it works. You can hear there the scale kind of moving up, not just on the notes of the bass, but then also the filters as well. So if I play that again and look at the cutoff position of each of these filter tables, they're going up, and they're going up by the right amount to equal one semitone each time. So the way that you can do that is to take a note, a modulator, and apply that to the different things that you want. The way I've done it is to scale this to a kind of tuning knob, and then this is basically controlling each of the cutoffs. And so the note that you select is going to be what sets the amount. So you can see here, if I press that note, it sets that value there. Now it's coming up by one. And then that way you can kind of control the resulting sort of scale that's being printed, if you like, on top of your bass sound that way. And again, I've done it multi-band so that I can keep the low end completely clear. Really just this sample, and then isolating the bands gives you a bit more control over it as well. And again, you can kind of adjust the gain in the mix to suit your taste. The only other thing I've done is to put some reverb in here, which I'm controlling with the mod wheel, to make it sound a bit lusher. And then I've also set up the macros to control the resonance of all of these. I've got 6 filter tables in total. The harmonic mix of each of these. So these are all tuned to slightly different notes. And so you can control the overall resulting chord a little bit by adjusting the mix of these different harmonics. I've also got this kind of master tuning knob so that you can kind of retune things as well, which might be useful depending on what bass sample you're putting into it. And then finally, you can also use this control to select the filter table position as well, so you can get a bit more control. So down here, it sounds a bit like cleaner. And then we start to get more of those harmonics, making it sound more chord-like. So apart from that, the only things I've done here is to add in a little bit of extra modulation on some of the other things. And then once you've kind of done that, you can also experiment by combining different styles of filter table as well. So I've got this extra one here on the end called diffuser. Which has a really nice metallic ringing kind of quality, and I've just used some modulation to kind of sweep through the cutoff and the mix of that a little bit to kind of shape the overall tone of the sound. So you can kind of experiment with modulating the filter tables and combining them in different ways to get some really interesting, nice sonic material that you would kind of struggle to do with any other technique. Looking at another example now, this one I've called Mega Squelch, and you'll hear why. So once again, starting with the same bass sound as I had in the last preset, and then using filter table to add serious amounts of squelch. So this is a preset called Mega Squelch. It's one of the ones that is included in the Spectral. So there's lots of different filter tables for you to kind of experiment with and find nice textures in that the nice people at Kilohertz have given you as well. And all I'm doing here is just using some different modulation shapes to go through that filter table. I'm not doing anything with the cutoff or the resonance. It's all just happening by scrolling through the filter table. So although some of the stuff I've done so far has been quite complicated, you don't necessarily need to overcomplicate things. You can get some great results just experimenting with the actual filter tables themselves and finding some nice kind of movement within those as well. Some really cool textures of that. Let's take a look at one more as well. So this one I've called Rave Shaper. So let's just listen to this. This is actually, again, the same bass sound. I've got a unison on it, but it's the same sound. Bit of reverb, bit of distortion and EQ. But the real action is happening in lane 1, where we once again have a filter table. And this one's called Cloud, and it's really kind of like an insane comb filter. Sounds like this. So without and with. Now I've set up lots of different macros, but again, it's just about working with different LFOs to kind of modulate some of these parameters, mainly the cutoff and the resonance in this case. But the macros allow you to then kind of do different things. So we can change the frequency focus, as I've called it. So really that's just modulating, as you can see here, the cutoff start position. We've also got the resonance, of course, as well, here. You can also change the speed by just changing the speed of the LFOs that are controlling those things. And you can also kind of change the shape. So this is just about changing the frame position on the LFO table to get different kind of shapes of modulation out of it. There's another shaper here, which is controlling the frame of this LFO, which is then also modulating this LFO. And you can also add in this extra pattern by adding in some extra size or sort of amount on this LFO table here as well. So loads of different combinations and fun that you can have with that to shape how these filter tables are generating these amazing textures. Let's look at one final example then. So this is really an evolution of that previous preset. You'll notice some of the processing is quite similar. Let's listen to it without. So I've got a different sample this time. And then with the filter table. So this one's called Buenas Noches, and it's a kind of really exotic notch filter type of filter table. If we scroll through, you can see this kind of the weird and wonderful shapes that we're getting in the white here, which would be really hard, maybe impossible to design in almost any other way if you were trying to do any kind of normal filtering on a sound like this. So the beauty about filter tables is they kind of open up this whole new realm of filters to color your sounds with. So this one's Buenas Noches. I'm just going to keep everything exactly the same. Let's just flick to the next one. Dying robot, that sounds pretty cool. Moving vowels. Rare earth metals. So there's just tons and tons of possibilities. And so this is kind of opening up a whole new world of synthesis possibilities. Of course, as we've seen, you can load in your samples. You can go in and design these filter tables in a huge amount of detail like you would if you were designing a wavetable as a generator. So it's, yeah, fascinating new area, and I'm looking forward to getting stuck in and making loads of great new sounds. So that's just 5 ways that I've come up with since it's been released to use Filter Table. I'm sure there's many other creative, amazing things you can do with it as well. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And if you like this video and you want to get more videos like this from us here at DBS Institute, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe. But that's it for this video, and I'll see you in the next one.